Hello everyone, I'm Darkside Phil, and just moments ago, I completed my standard difficulty run of the Dead Space remake that just released here in 2023. Ever since the game was announced, people ask me what are my thoughts about it. Do you think that it's going to be as original or different as, say, the Final Fantasy VII or Resident Evil 2 remakes? Will I play it? And ultimately, a big issue of contention that came up around my viewer base and just on the internet in general was that the original makers of Dead Space, that's Visceral Games, the studio that made this game back in 2008, actually no longer work for EA. They're their own standalone studio now, and that they just recently, in December 2022, released their own survival horror game, the Callisto Protocol. And everyone's wondering, what's better, Callisto Protocol or the Dead Space remake? Which should you buy if you have a choice? And is the Dead Space remake worth $70? The purpose of this video is to give you my honest thoughts about the situation. Now, to do that, I need to give you some perspective. 2008, I'm just becoming a YouTuber. It's a hobby for me. It's not a job. I'm just messing around with random games. And the first horror game I ever chose to make videos of on YouTube was the original Dead Space. The game blew me away. It was scary as heck. It had a lot of graphical things that I had never really seen before in a sci-fi setting, particularly the lighting and the gore of the necromorphs. I liked the gunplay, and in particular, it was one of my favorite games at the time that I ever played. Over the years, I became a huge fan of the Dead Space series, replaying the game several times, then playing its sequel Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3 as playthroughs live on YouTube and, also when I used to live stream on Twitch. So I have a lot of history with the Dead Space franchise. I actually replayed Dead Space a second time in 2013 for my audience, and that was my latest playthrough of the game. I did go back and replay Dead Space 2 recently a couple years ago as well. And so, the build-up and the hype began for the Dead Space remake, and as we started seeing all this stuff about it, I was kind of skeptical. Taking a look at the graphics or whatever, I was like, that's all well and good, but if they're going to be charging you a full $70 price tag for this game, are they going to innovate this game enough to make it justify that price tag? Are they going to innovate with the gunplay? Are they going to add new parts of the game that weren't in the original? Will this game be worth a full purchase? Or for someone like me who's played Dead Space over the years multiple times, is it going to feel more like you're replaying the same game over and over? And that was ultimately a question, all right? Now, last month, well, I guess now it's 2 months ago, I played Callisto Protocol as a brand new release. And when I played it, I was honest. I basically was someone who wanted to give it a fair shake. For some really weird reason that I don't understand, it seems like the games media, as well as many content creators on the internet, crapped all over the Callisto Protocol. And I don't really understand why. Now, the Callisto Protocol, again, actually the spiritual successor to the original Dead Space, made by a lot of the dev team of the original Dead Space game, feels different. Does it have a lot of similarities when it comes to an immersive UI, so that way you don't see health meter, ammo meter? Yes, very similar to Dead Space. Does it have a lot of similar? Oh, you put on the suit, right? Oh, it's the suit, just like Isaac's. There's people mutating into monsters, just like Dead Space. A lot of those things are similar, but I feel like that dev studio had the right to do that because they made the original game. Now, they don't own the rights to Dead Space, but if they were going to make their own game that they felt would be the spiritual successor, they had the right to take those ideas that originally they had come up with and put it into a new game, as long as it had enough of a transformative feel that they weren't basically making Dead Space again. When I played Callisto Protocol, I didn't feel like I was playing Dead Space again. In fact, a lot of the things in that game were very different from Dead Space. The fact that the gunplay is weak. You can't really play it like a third-person shooter. You have to be constantly learning how to dodge and do melee combos and attacks to critically hit opponents and get them away from you. And in addition, you have to use a lot of stealth. Dead Space 1 has 0 stealth. So that is by far a new and interesting gameplay element that I liked in the Callisto Protocol. Now, are there similarities? Yes, undoubtedly you're going to say I can draw parallels between Dead Space 1 and Callisto Protocol. But once I played through and beat Callisto Protocol, albeit there were a few very frustrating parts, I would say it was a really fun game. Was it difficult? Yes. Callisto Protocol is way more challenging than Dead Space 1. It's just a different animal. You have to actually learn ways to survive when all the odds are against you. You can't just rely on the plethora arsenal of weapons that you're going to find in the game. The game doesn't throw a lot of ammo at you. The weapons aren't enough to take down the enemies. You have to be using stealth and melee. So it's very different in that regard, okay? Even the plot has similarities. So yeah, you're always going to say, oh, they bit off of it. No, they didn't. They made the original. They have the right to make another game that's similar but different. Callisto Protocol absolutely is different. And unlike a lot of my contemporaries, meaning other content creators out there, I didn't rage quit it. I never got so frustrated that I didn't want to play anymore. I just kept challenging myself to get better at it, and I beat it and really enjoyed it. I thought it was an outstanding game. A lot of people disagree with me, and they have the right to do that. But I tried to give Callisto Protocol a fair shake, and I really, really loved it. In fact, I think a lot of people kind of, sadly, panned it because the PC version ran so poorly. All right? I'll agree there. I've seen the PC version. I've actually watched multiple playthroughs of trying to play this on the PC. It's crashing. The graphics are having issues. I played it on console, Xbox Series X particularly. Never had a problem with it. It was seriously smooth, and it was a beautiful game. Really great survival horror game. Very different than Dead Space, which I'm happy about. Because right now, I just played the Dead Space remake. And let me tell you, if Callisto Protocol played like the Dead Space remake, I would have felt like I played the same game twice. Thank God it was different. Dead Space remake, let's now get to the subject matter, is essentially Dead Space 1. But there's some differences. The graphics are much improved. Now, the frame rate is a steady 60 frames per second in most parts. A couple times it chopped up for me on the Series X, but for the most part, really good. Isaac is no longer a silent protagonist. He now has a voice and has input in cutscenes and the like, similar to how he did in Dead Space 2, but they decided to change that here in the first game. Certain gameplay elements have been changed. For example, the Ishimura ship now all links together almost like you're playing Metroid or Castlevania. Previously, each level was kind of linear, and you would use trams to go from one level to the next, and once you progressed to the next area, you couldn't go back. In this game, everything links together, and you can go back later on to unlock new areas and get new power-ups and the like. That's kind of a neat new thing that will add some replayability to the game for sure, and or add some playtime to your overall experience. Zero G. Now, this is different. In the original Dead Space 1, there were zero G parts. There's zero G parts in the remake, but the zero G parts, you freeform float around, similar to how they added in Dead Space 2. You didn't do that in the original Dead Space. In the original Dead Space, you had to have your magnet boots step on certain parts, and then you had to do puzzles or fight bosses there. It was kind of frustrating because it was very limiting. Now being able to freeform move around definitely made it feel like a better experience. And in general, there was one particular boss fight that is so much better. In the original Dead Space, all you do is you aim cannons and fire. It's a completely different thing from the rest of the game. It's like a mini game. In this game, it's epic. You're shooting around, you're aiming with these guns, but you also have to aim your weapon at it. You're dodging, you're using all the abilities you found in the game. Very neat. And I think that was much better done than in the original game. All right? But in reality, what is the true addition to this game? Cutscenes. There is supplemental information added to the story about Isaac's family that you didn't know about in the original game. There's also new video cutscenes that are added that were not part of the original game, that were more text logs, or some cases they didn't exist at all, that are added in the form of side missions. You'll be going through the Ishimura, and it'll tell you to go to these optional areas, and you'll get a new cutscene starring Nicole or one of the doctors on the ship that originally was not in the game. And it'll flesh out a lot more of the plot, and you'll get a lot more of an overall plot experience in this remake version than you did in the original. The original, a lot of the stuff was left to mystery to the last minute. In this game, there's kind of more of a build-up due to these new additional cutscenes. And for what I'm going to understand from my viewers, they actually told me that a lot of these new cutscenes were based on the optional anime spin-offs that had been released many, many years ago from Dead Space and were very successful. So it's kind of neat to see kind of that supplementary content added into the main game for this remake. But for the most part, this game is Dead Space 1. The gunplay is pretty much identical to the original Dead Space game from 2008. They didn't really tweak it at all. Excuse me. If anything, the one thing they did tweak was a little bit about the enemies. There's some enemies now that they used to be able to shoot them and they would kind of stagger. Now they just keep moving at you. So basically, you got to use the stasis a lot more in this game, I feel, than in the original, because these enemies aren't stopping when you shoot them. In addition, there's a new enemy type that spits at you, and it's not the baby with tendrils, which originally was in the original game. There's a different one now. So there's a little bit of change, but for the most part, if you've played Dead Space 1, you've played this game, only now you get a little bit more story, better graphics, and zero-G gameplay. So, does that warrant a $70 purchase? Oh, man, that is a very subjective question. I'm someone who's played Dead Space 1 again and again and again over the years. Now, I hadn't played it in about 10 years. Replaying it now was a fun experience for sure. It was fresh, it was interesting, because it had these facelifts. But that's exactly what it is. It's a facelift. This is not a new game. When you replay Final Fantasy VII in the remake, that's a new game. That's not for the original Final Fantasy VII. When you replay Resident Evil 2 remake, that feels like a totally retooled new game. This is not a retooled new game. It is Dead Space 1 only with these minor facelift improvements. So, is it worth $70? Well, if you've never played the original Dead Space, perhaps yes. If you really want to experience the definitive version of Dead Space 1, play the Dead Space remake, pay $70 for it, get on it now, really enjoy it. But I have a very hard time justifying a full $70 retail purchase for this game when it's exactly the same as the game you've already played. Yes, there's a few new things, but it's almost identical. And that's sad. I was actually hoping maybe they would add a new part of the Ishimura. Even if it's not even its own standalone chapter, have it be a part of the game that you go back to a couple times for some optional things, or maybe a new boss tossed in, a new enemy type. It really feels like you're playing the same game. And that's unfortunate. So, I was hoping for more. And I don't feel like I got out of the game what I was really looking forward to. Just being honest. Now, if you're going to directly compare the Callisto Protocol to the Dead Space remake and ask, what's the better game? Okay? Well, if you like a game that's run and gun action, and all you care about is basically run and gun, that's Dead Space. But that's also a 15-year-old game trope where we've kind of outgrown that. I mean, at the time of Dead Space 1, you also had Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, which everyone got tired of and said, we want to go back to classic survival horror. Dead Space really isn't that. By the end of the game, you got like 7, 8 weapons, you got ammo coming out your butt, you're just unloading giant upgraded arsenals against the denizens of the dead. It doesn't feel like a huge challenge by the end. It kind of feels like you're Rambo, all right? Callisto Protocol was the complete opposite experience. Even if you had all the guns and you had the upgrades for them, by the end of the game, you're still getting your butt handed to you by some of the mini bosses and the like. The final boss is incredibly challenging no matter how much you've got in that game. So, to me, if you want to ask me what game is more classic survival horror, Callisto Protocol is. It plays more like a classic survival horror game. It gives you more of that element that you're always going to be on low ammo, or your guns aren't really going to help you. You don't know what's around the next corner. It could be a room full of deadly enemies that you have to either stealth by, or maybe there's something that's going to get you no matter what you've done to prepare. You don't really get that element in Dead Space. You know what I'm saying? You just don't. And that's okay. The game is great on its own merits, but if you're looking for a true challenging survival horror experience, Callisto Protocol is absolutely more challenging and more of a classic formula of what you would want from a horror game. Dead Space is a great romp in space with sci-fi elements and horror, but a lot of the horror comes from the gore and the story, not necessarily the gameplay. I mean, almost the entire game is just sending these necromorphs at you constantly, all right? It's different in Callisto Protocol. Having to manage and master that melee system, being able to micromanage each enemy and keep them at a distance. You can't fight more than 2 enemies at once in Callisto Protocol. In Dead Space, you do it 90% of the time. Especially once you get big guns like the Force gun, you're blowing them back. It's not even a problem anymore, okay? So for me, if you were to ask me out of these 2 games in the modern day, would I rather play Dead Space 1 or the Callisto Protocol, and which is the better survival horror game? I would honestly answer you, I think Callisto Protocol is. But the thing is, most gamers aren't looking for an ultra challenging experience anymore. They're looking for a more casualized run and gun experience. It's weird how things go full circle, right? We started off with tank control games, ultra challenging, limited ammo, don't know where to go, can't solve the puzzle. That's all part of the survival horror experience. Then the games got so dumbed down during that era when we had Dead Space 1, 2, and 3, Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. Everyone said, man, those games are too easy and they're just action games now. Change it back to classic survival horror. So we saw that with games like Resident Evil 7 and 8 going back to a more classic formula. And now we've got all these reboots coming out. And now you come to realize a game like Callisto Protocol comes out. Oh no, too hard, too challenging. I don't want to learn a melee system. I don't want a game that I die in 2-3 hits. No, this is not fair. Give me back my Dead Space. And it's hilarious to me that I'm seeing these reviews come out for Dead Space Remake that are like, oh, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Dude, it's the same game from 15 years ago. Why don't you admit that in the review? It's literally the same game with maybe, 2 hours of new content, if that. And you're charging $70. I kind of feel bad because that original dev team, that Visceral Games team that went on to make Callisto Protocol, they got really hurt 2 months ago when their game came out and all these people, rage quit the game, it sucks and blah, blah, blah. But no one could really justify it besides the graphics sucked on the PC. Really. Now, this game comes out, everyone's 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. You do realize they made this game, right? Callisto Protocol is the evolution of Dead Space. Dead Space Remake is a return back to form of 15 years ago, which is fine. But we moved on from that and said that we wanted something different. That's why we don't get run and gun games anymore. Now all of a sudden, run and gun games are 9 and 10 out of 10 again. I don't get it. It really makes me scratch my head. What do people want? I'm confused because for me, I like the classic Dead Spaces, but I know where they came from, and I would like an evolution of that, which is what Callisto Protocol was. But apparently people don't want that. They just want, go back to the games we know. So, listen, I guarantee you this game will likely sell a lot, and probably we're going to end up with a Dead Space 2 remake, a Dead Space 3 remake. Hopefully, if they make a Dead Space 3 remake, they change it, because then the game got so watered down and so run and gun, there was like no horror at all. It was just an action game, much like Resident Evil 6, okay? And I really hope that if they do make more remakes in this trilogy, that they do change the plot, because I do think that by the end of Dead Space 3, they wrote themselves into a corner they couldn't write themselves out of, which is why the series died after that. I don't want to see that happen again. I would love to see Dead Space continue on with originality, but I think it's kind of messed up that the original makers of this game made their own game, they tried to innovate, and everyone crapped on them for trying to do something different. And now the remake comes out and everyone says 10 out of 10, but the game is literally the same game that I played 15 years ago with some minor tweaks. So, you can formulate your own subjective opinions, but my opinion is, if you already played the original Dead Space and you played it recently, you should not be paying $70 for Dead Space Remake. It's the same. You're not going to get a different experience. You're going to feel like you played Dead Space again with some quality of life improvements and, some better graphics, but it's not a new game. Again, unlike Resident Evil 2 Remake or Final Fantasy 7 Remake, it's definitely the same game that you played 15 years ago. That's unfortunate that people are now kind of kissing its butt. You're going to have people running out there to buy it, may not realize they're going to play the same game that you could get on Game Pass right now for free. So, in conclusion, I like the Dead Space Remake. I did enjoy some of the improvements. It ain't worth $70 to me. It shouldn't be worth $70 to someone who's already played this game many times. Wait for a price drop, in my opinion. And is Callisto Protocol as good or better? Is Dead Space better? That's a subjective question. If you like more run and gun, action-based games, you're going to like Dead Space more. If you want true survival horror, where everything is dangerous, where you're never safe, where you can't amass an arsenal that's going to save your butt, then you want to play Callisto Protocol. So what do you want out of your survival horror? Do you want true suspense and danger? Or do you want, oh, look, by the end, I'm Rambo blowing everything away? That's Dead Space. I mean, he's got a giant foam freaking hand in the game that kills everything with one hit. You know what I'm saying? You can kind of tell what they were going for by the end. So, thank you for watching this video. I hope at least this has cleared up some questions. Maybe now you can make a judgment for yourself and enjoy. No matter what kind of survival horror you like, there's a lot to eat right now. We're eating the survival horror buffet. We've got a lot more survival horror games coming right around the corner. We've got Silent Hill remakes, Resident Evil 4 remake. We've got all kinds of survival horror. So for all those of us who are big fans of it, this is a good time to be a gamer. All right? Enjoy. No matter what your forte is, whatever your preference is, you're going to eat well in 2023. And I hope to see you for those playthroughs in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone. Peace out. See you later.